The crystal chandeliers cast golden light across the private dining room of Torrio, one of Manhattan's most exclusive Italian restaurants. Lucia Grant moved between the chairs with practiced efficiency, her black server's apron tied neatly at her waist, white blouse crisp. Despite the late hour, Tuesday nights were usually slower, but not tonight. 6 men sat around the mahogany table, their conversation a low murmur beneath the soft classical music filtering through hidden speakers. Lucia had learned long ago to make herself invisible during these private gatherings. Wealthy men conducting business didn't want to be interrupted by questions about wine pairings or dessert menus. She placed a fresh bottle of Boone on the table, careful not to let glass clink against the surface. The man at the head of the table didn't look up, his attention fixed on the leather portfolio spread before him. Alexander Bellini. Even if the manager hadn't briefed the staff with hushed urgency about tonight's guest, Lucia would have recognized power when she saw it. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than she made in 6 months, tailored so perfectly it seemed molded to his frame. Dark hair swept back from a facet that belonged on old Italian statues, all sharp angles and commanding presence. His eyes, a deep brown that caught the light when he shifted, scanned documents with the kind of focus that made everything else in the room fade into background noise. The terms are acceptable, one of the other men said in English, his accent vaguely European. 80 million for exclusive import rights across the eastern seaboard. Your family will handle distribution through existing channels. Lucia refilled water glasses, her movements mechanical. She'd served hundreds of business dinners in her 3 years of Torrio. This one looked no different from the others, just men in expensive suits making deals that would never touch her world. 7-year contracts are here, another man added, sliding papers across the table. Signed by the producers in Tuscany. Everything is legitimate. Alexander leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. My attorney will review before I sign anything. Standard procedure. The man who'd spoken first laughed, the sound too loud for the elegant room. Of course, of course. We expect nothing less from the Bellini family. Your reputation for thoroughness is well known. Lucia moved toward the far end of the table to collect empty plates. 2 men sat slightly apart from the main conversation, their heads bent close together. They spoke quietly, words stumbling out in rapid syllables that made Lucia's hands still for just a fraction of a second. Sicilian, her grandmother's language, the one Carmela had taught her during long afternoons in their cramped Queen's apartment, insisting that Lucia remember where their family came from. Even if they'd been in America for 2 generations, Tuesday is perfect, one of the men murmured, his Sicilian flowing with an accent that didn't quite match the regional dialect. The explosives are already positioned at the port. When Bellini signs and moves his operation to the new warehouse location, we detonate. The cartel takes the territory while he's dealing with the chaos. Lucia's heart slammed against her ribs. She kept their face blank, years of service industry training allowing her to maintain the neutral expression of a man who understood nothing. Her hands continued their work, stacking plates with steady movements that betrayed none of the ice spreading through her veins. The Colombians confirmed? The second man asked, also in Sicilian, though his accent carried hints of something else beneath it. Mexican, maybe. The realization made her stomach turn. Yes, once Bellini is eliminated, Sinaloa controls everything from Baltimore to Boston. The contract signing is just theater. He won't leave this building alive if the signature doesn't come through tonight. Lucia's mind raced. These weren't Italian businessmen. They were cartel members posing as legitimate wine importers, and Alexander Bellini had no idea he was walking into a trap. She glanced at Haim across the table. He was reviewing another document, a gold pen poised over signature line. His second in command, a broad-shouldered man who'd been introduced as Joseph, stood near the door with the kind of stillness that suggested military training. Two other security personnel flanked the room's entrance, alert but not alarmed. No one else had noticed the conversation in Sicilian. Why would they? It was a dead language to most people, especially in a city like New York, where a dozen languages mixed on every street corner. Lucia picked up her tray of dishes and turned toward the kitchen, her pulse thundering in her ears. She could walk away, pretend she'd heard nothing. She was a waitress, not a hero. Whatever war these men were waging had nothing to do with her. But if she stayed silent, Alexander Bellini would die tonight, maybe others too, if the explosives at the port were real. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory, words spoken during one of their last conversations before Carmela passed away 3 years ago. We don't turn away from people in danger, Lucia. Our family survived because strangers showed courage when it mattered. You carry that same blood. Lucia set the tray down on the service, cart near the wall, and picked up the wine bottle she'd opened earlier. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached Alexander's chair, the weight of what she was about to do settling over her like a physical presence. "Excuse me, sir," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "May I refresh your glass?" Alexander glanced up, his dark eyes meeting hers for the first time that evening. Something in his gaze shifted, a flicker of attention that suggested he actually saw her rather than just acknowledging her presence. "Please," he said. Lucia leaned in, angling the bottle over his glass. Her mouth was close to his ear, close enough that her whisper would carry to him alone. She switched to Sicilian, the words flowing with the same fluency her grandmother had drilled into her since childhood. "It's a trap. Don't sign anything. They're planning to kill you tonight." Alexander went absolutely still. The in his hand stopped moving. The small muscle in his jaw flexed once, the only visible reaction to her words. His eyes cut to her face, searching, analyzing. Lucia straightened, moving the bottle away as if she'd simply poured his wine. Her heart hammered so violently she was certain everyone in the room could hear it. For 3 seconds, that felt like hours. Nothing happened. Then Alexander set down his pen with deliberate care and pushed back from the table slightly, his posture shifting from relaxed businessman to something far more dangerous. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made everyone stop talking immediately. "I've reconsidered. This deal moves too fast for my comfort. We'll postpone the signing until my team completes a full audit of your operations." The man who'd presented the contract stiffened. "Mr. Bellini, we've been negotiating for months. Everything is in order. Then you won't mind waiting another week while I verify that?" Alexander's tone allowed no argument. His eyes flicked to the 2 men who'd been speaking in Sicilian, and Lucia saw the exact moment those men realized something had gone wrong. One of them reached inside his jacket. "Joseph," Alexander said calmly. The security chief moved like water, fluid, and impossibly fast. He had the reaching man's arm twisted behind his back before the weapon cleared leather, driving him face first into the mahogany table with enough force to rattle the wine glasses. Chaos erupted. The second Sicilian-speaking man lunged toward Alexander, but 2 more security personnel materialized from positions Lucia hadn't even noticed, intercepting him mid-stride. Chairs crashed backward. One of the other businessmen shouted something in Spanish. Confirming Lucia's suspicions about the cartel connection, Alexander remained seated, utterly composed as his people subdued the attackers with professional efficiency within 90 seconds. All 5 supposed businessmen were on their knees, hands secured behind their backs with zip ties that Joseph produced from somewhere inside his jacket. "Clear the weapon," Alexander ordered, his eyes never leaving the men on the floor. "Check them all." Joseph and his team found 4 handguns, 2 knives, and what looked like a phone detonator on the man who'd spoken about explosives. Alexander examined each item as it was placed on the table in front of him, his expression carved from stone. Lucia had backed against the wall during the commotion, her tray forgotten on the service cart. She pressed her palms flat against the cool plaster, trying to steady her breathing. Alexander's gaze found her across the room. He stood in only fluid movement and crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. Up close, he was taller than she'd realized, easily 6'2" or 6'3". The air around him seemed to vibrate with controlled violence barely held in check. "What's your name?" he asked, his Sicilian carrying the authentic Pole motion of someone who'd grown up speaking it. "Lucia," she managed. "Lucia Grant, you speak Sicilian." It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. "My grandmother taught me. She was from a village near Palermo, and you understood what they said." "Yes." Her voice came out steadier now. "They're not wine importers. They're cartel, Sinaloa, I think based on the accent underneath the Sicilian. They mentioned explosives at the port and taking territory after you signed the contract. This was supposed to be an ambush." Alexander studied her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed, as if he could see past her server's uniform to every secret she'd ever kept. "You could have stayed silent, pretended you heard nothing." "I could have," Lucia agreed. Her grandmother's face flashed through her mind again. "But I didn't." Something shifted in Alexander's expression. Not quite a smile, but a softening around his eyes that suggested approval. He turned to Joseph, switching back to English. "Get Marco on the phone. Tell him to check the new warehouse at the port. If there are explosives, I want them found and disarmed within the hour." "On it, boss." Joseph already had his phone out, stepping away to make the call. Alexander returned his attention to the men on the floor. "Sinaloa cartel. Interesting choice, gentlemen. You're a long way from Mexico." The man who led the negotiations spat blood onto the hardwood floor. "You're already dead, Bellini. This territory belongs to us now. You just don't know it yet." "I disagree." Alexander's voice remained conversational, almost pleasant. "But we'll have plenty of time to discuss your mistakes. Joseph, call our friends at the precinct. Tell them we have AGIF for them. Multiple weapons charges, conspiracy to commit murder, attempted fraud. That should keep them occupied while we have a longer conversation about their employers." Lucia watched the scene unfold with a strange sense of detachment, as if she were observing from outside her own body. 10 minutes ago, she'd been a waitress, worried about whether Table 7 needed more bread. Now she stood in the middle of what was clearly a mob operation, having just saved the life of one of New York's most powerful crime bosses. "Miss Grant," Alexander's voice pulled her back to the present. "Don't leave yet. We need to talk." It wasn't a request. Lucia nodded mutely, her throat too dry for words. The next 20 minutes passed in organized chaos. Police arrived with surprising speed, though the officers who entered the private dining room greeted Joseph by name and seemed unsurprised by the scene they found. The supposed businessmen were led away in handcuffs, still protesting their innocence despite weapons and detonators sitting in evidence bags. Through it all, Alexander chestured everything from his position at the table, making calls on a slim black phone, issuing quiet orders that were followed without question. Lucia remained where he told her to stay, watching this man command an invisible empire with nothing more than tone and presence. Finally, Joseph returned from the hallway, where he'd been coordinating with someone on his phone. "Marco found them, boss. 3 devices positioned throughout the new warehouse, just like she said. Bomb squad is handling it now, but Marco estimates they had enough explosives to level the entire building and take out half the block." Alexander's jaw tightened. The only visible reaction to the news that he'd been hours away from a catastrophic attack. His eyes found Lucia again, and this time she saw something she hadn't expected in those dark depths: gratitude, and beneath it, a spark of interest that had nothing to do with business. "Clear the room," he told Joseph. "Everyone out except Miss Grant." The security team filed out efficiently, closing the heavy wooden door behind them with a soft click. Suddenly, the private dining room felt much smaller. The air between Lucia and Alexander charged with an energy she couldn't quite name. He gestured to one of the chairs at the table. "Sit, please." Lucia crossed the room on legs that felt disconnected from her body and lowered herself into the chair, acutely aware of how out of place she looked in her server's uniform, surrounded by the wreckage of the interrupted business deal. Alexander took the seat beside her rather than across the table, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and understated with notes of sandalwood and citrus. "You saved my life tonight," he said quietly. "Do you understand that?" Lucia swallowed hard. "I just did what Onion would do." "No." The word came out flat, final. Most people would have pretended they heard nothing. Self-preservation is a powerful instinct, especially when crime families and cartels are involved. "But you chose to warn me anyway. Why?" She thought about lying, about giving him some noble reason that would make her sound brave rather than foolish. But something in his gaze demanded honesty. "My grandmother always said we don't turn away from people in danger. That courage matters, even when it's scary." Lucia twisted the small gold earrings her grandmother had given her, a nerve Auschwitz she'd never broken. "And I guess I couldn't live with myself if I'd let you walk into a trap when I could have stopped it." Alexander leaned back in his chair, studying her with that same unnerving intensity. "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman." She was Carmela Grant, born Carmela Rizzo in Sicily. She came here when she was 20 and never went back. But she made sure I knew where we came from. "When did she pass?" 3 years ago. The familiar ache settled in Lucia's chest. "She raised me after my parents died in a car accident. I was 9. I'm sorry." The condolences sounded genuine rather than reflexive. "My parents were also from Palermo. They came to New York in the 70s, built their business from nothing." Lucia didn't ask what business. She had a pretty good idea, and naming it felt dangerous. "The cartel will know you interfered," Alexander said, his tone shifting to something more serious. "When those men are interrogated, they'll talk about what happened here tonight. Your involvement won't stay secret." The ice that had started to thaw in Lucia's veins returned with a vengeance. She hadn't thought that far ahead, hadn't considered the consequences beyond the immediate moment of warning him. "What does that mean?" Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. "It means you're in danger now. Soloa doesn't forgive witnesses, especially ones who cost them this much." Alexander's expression hardened. "I won't let anything happen to you because you saved my life. You're under my protection now, whether you want it or not." Lucia's first instinct was to argue, to insist she could take care of herself the way she always had, but the certainty in his voice, the absolute conviction that he could keep her safe made the protest die in her throat. "I don't even know you," she whispered. "No," Alexander agreed. "But after tonight, that's going to change." Lucia barely slept that night. She'd gone home to her studio apartment in Atoria around 2 o'clock in the morning, escorted by 2 of Alexander's men, who insisted on checking every corner of her building before letting her climb the stairs alone. They stayed in a black sedan across the street, windows tinted, exhaust pipe releasing steady clouds into the cold air. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of Torrio over and over, the Sicilian conversation, Alexander's face when she'd whispered the warning, the guns, the zip ties, the casual efficiency with which his people had handled armed cartel members like they were dealing with unruly children. What had she gotten herself into? The knock on her door came at 7:45, sharp and authoritative. Lucia jerked upright, her heart immediately racing. She pulled on Jean Sam's sweater, fingers clumsy with adrenaline, and peered through the peephole. Two men in dark suits stood in the narrow hallway. Not the same ones from last night, but they had that same quality of controlled alertness that marked them as Alexander's people. "Miss Grant," the taller one said when she cracked open the door. "Mr. Bellini requests your presence. We're here to escort you." Requests as if she had a choice. "Give me 5 minutes," Lucia said. She brushed her teeth, splashed water on her face, and pulled her hair into a ponytail with shaking hands. No makeup, no time to care about appearances. She grabbed her phone, her keys, and the small purse that held her license, and the $63 currently in her checking account. The men led her downstairs to a different sedan. This one charcoal gray with tinted windows that made it impossible to see inside from Thus Street. Lucia slid into the back seat, the leather cold even through her jeans. They drove in silence. Morning traffic clogged the streets, taxis honking, delivery trucks double-parked. The city slowly waking to another Wednesday. Lucia watched it all through the window, wondering if this was the last time she'd see her neighborhood as a free woman. The sedan pulled up in front of a glass tower in the financial district. All sleek lines and reflective surfaces that caught fiery November sunlight. The men escorted her through a lobby filled with marble and modern art, past security guards who nodded recognition into an elevator that required a key card to access the top floors. Lucia's stomach dropped as they ascended. 42 floors, according to the digital display. The doors opened onto a reception area that looked like something from an architecture magazine. Minimalist furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows, abstract paintings that probably cost more than her car. A woman in her 30s with sharp eyes and an expensive suit looked up from behind a glass desk. "Miss Grant, Mr. Bellini is expecting you." She was led down a hallway lined with closed doors, past what looked like conference rooms and executive offices to a corner suite at the end. One of the escorts knocked twice and opened the door without waiting for a response. Alexander stood at the windows, his back to the room, phone pressed to his ear. He wore another impeccable suit, this one navy blue, his hair still damp from a recent shower. The office was massive, easily twice the size of Lucia's entire apartment, dominated by a desk that looked carved from a single piece of dark wood. "I don't care what it costs," Alexander said into the phone, his tone flat and final. "I want every port facility checked by tonight. If you find anything else, you call me immediately." He ended the call and turned. His eyes found Lucia immediately, sweeping over her casual clothes and bare face with an assessment that felt but thorough and strangely non-judgmental. "Sit," he said, gesturing to one of fellow chairs facing his desk. Lucia sat. The escorts left, closing the door behind them with a quiet click that felt ominous. Alexander moved around his desk, but didn't sit. He leaned against the front edge, arms crossed, studying her with the same intensity he'd shown last night. "How much do you know about Sinaloa cartel?" he asked without preamble. "Only what I see on the news. Drugs, violence, Mexico." Lucia's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Why?" "Because they put a price on your head last night." The words hit like a physical blow. Lucia gripped the arms off chair, her knuckles going white. "What?" "The men we arrested talked. They always do, eventually." Alexander's expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes suggested anger beneath the calm surface. "They reported back to their handlers before the police took them. Your description, your name from the restaurant's employee records, everything. Sinaloa doesn't forgive witnesses, especially ones who cost them an $80 million operation and a foothold in New York." Lucia's mouth went dry. "I'm just a waitress. I don't know anything else about their operation." I can't hurt them. You already did. And in their world, that's enough. Alexander's jaw tightened. I'm not telling you this to scare you, though you should be scared. I'm telling you because you need to understand the situation. These people will find you. It's not a question, O'Fief, but when you have maybe 24 hours before they locate you, and when they do, they won't be interested in conversation. Panic clawed up Lucia's throat. She forced it down, forced herself to think. Then I'll leave, disappear. I can be on a bus to somewhere by this afternoon. Where? Alexander's question was gentle but pointed. You have family somewhere? Friends in another state who can hide you. Lucia stopped. She had no one. Carmela had been her only family, and the friends she'd made over the years were casual acquaintances at best. People she'd shared shifts with but never let get close. I'll figure it out. You won't have time to figure it out. Alexander straightened, his full hate suddenly imposing in the quiet office. But I can protect you. I have resources, safe locations, people who can keep you alive while we handle the cartel problem. Why would you do that? The question burst out before Lucia could stop it. You don't owe me anything. I just did what anyone should do, but most people wouldn't have. Alexander moved closer, stopping a few feet from her chair. You saved my life, Miss Grant. In me world, that creates a debt. More than that, you're in danger specificalibase you helped me. I don't let people suffer for loyalty, especially not someone like you. Someone like me, Lucia repeated, almost laughing. A waitress who speaks Sicilian? Semi-inebrive enough to speak up when it mattered? His gaze held hers. That's rare, valuable, and I protect what's valuable. The way he said valuable made something flutter in Lucia's chest, a sensation she firmly pushed aside. This wasn't about attraction or interest. This was about survival. What does protection mean exactly? She asked. A secure location where the cartel can't reach you. Security personnel to ensure your safety. Time for my people to handle the threat permanently. Alexander returned to his desk, pulling a manila folder from the top drawer. I'm offering you a choice. You can accept my help, or I can arrange for you to leave the country. New identity, passage to Italy, enough money to start over somewhere Sinloa won't look. He slid the folder across the desk. Inside, Lucia found a passport with her photo, but a different name. Anna Russo. Plane tickets to Rome dated for tomorrow morning. A bank card with what looked like a substantial balance based on the paperwork clipped to it. You made these overnight? She stunned. I have people who handle such things. Alexander's tone suggested this wasn't unusual for him. The passport will pass any inspection. The money is clean, untraceable. You could be in Italy by tomorrow afternoon, completely off their radar. Lucia stared at the documents, her mind spinning. A new life, a fresh start in the country her grandmother had left behind. Free from danger, free from the cartel, free from everything she'd built her. No, she heard herself say. Alexander's eyebrows rose slightly. No. Lucia pushed the folder back across the desk. I'm not running away from my life because some criminals are mad, interfered with their plan. I've worked for everything I have here. It's not much, but it's mine. I'm not giving that up. For a long moment, Alexander simply looked at her. Then something that might have been respect flickered across his face. You understand they will try to kill you? I understand you said you could protect me. Lucia met his gaze directly. So protect me. But I'm not leaving New York. Alexander leaned back in his chair, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. You're either very brave or very foolish. Maybe both. Lucia managed a shaky smile of her own dot. My grandmother would probably say I inherited her stubborn streak. Tell me about her. The request surprised Lucia Dot. We have time, and I'd like to know more about the woman who taught you to speak like you're from Palermo. So Lucia told him about Carmela Rizzo, who'd left Sicily at 20 with nothing but a suitcase and determination, who'd married young, lost her husband to a construction accident, and raised 3 children while working 2 jobs, who'd taken in her orphan granddaughter without hesitation and made sure Lucia never forgot where their family came from. She died 3 years ago. Lucia finished twisting the gold earrings. Heart attack. She was 71. I found her in her chair, knitting needles still in her hands. I'm sorry. Alexander's condolence carried genuine sympathy. It sounds like she was an impressive woman. She was everything. Lucia's throat tightened. After my parents died, she was all I had. When I lost her, I was completely alone. I understand that feeling. Alexander's expression softened slightly. My parents were also from Palermo. They came here in the 70s, built their business from nothing. My father died when I was 23, my mother 2 years later. I have a younger sister, Lauren, but I keep her far away from my world. She lives in Boston, works as a teacher, has no idea about most of what I do. That must be hard, Lucia said quietly. Keeping that distance, it keeps her safe. Alexander's jaw tightened, which is what matters. She has a normal life, a good life that's worth more than closeness. They sat in silence for a moment. 2 people who'd lost too much finding unexpected common ground in an office 42 floors above the city. So, what happens now? Lucia finally asked. Alexander stood, decisiveness returning to his posture. Now, we get you to a secure location. I have an apartment in Tribeca, not a penthouse. Just a functional space we use for people who need protection. It's monitored, secure, and the cartel won't find it. For how long? As long as it takes to eliminate the threat. He pulled a business card from his pocket, black with silver lettering and a single phone number. This is my personal line. You need anything, you call day or night. No one else has this number except my sister and my second in command. Lucia took the card, the weight of it somehow significant in her palm. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You're about to spend days, maybe weeks, confined to an apartment with security watching your every move. It's protective custody, not a vacation. Still better than buying dead. Lucia stood, shouldering her purse. When do we go now? The apartment in Tribeca was exactly as Alexander had described. Functional rather than luxurious, 2 bedrooms, a living area with reinforced windows, a kitchen stocked with basics. The security was subtle but present. Cameras in the hallway, guards rotated in 8-hour shifts outside the door. Lucia spent that day alternating between pacing and sitting, her mind unable to settle. She'd called her manager at Vittorio, claiming a family emergency that would keep her away for a while. The lie came easily, smoothly. Another small piece of her normal life slipping away. Alexander returned around 9 that evening, carrying bags from a nearby Italian deli. I thought you might be hungry. They ate at the small dining table. Conversation flowed more easily than Lucia had expected. He asked about her life, her dreams before circumstances had narrowed her options. She found herself talking about the languages she'd wanted to study, the degree she'd planned to pursue before money became impossible. What would you do? Alexander asked. If money wasn't an issue, if you could study anything, be anything. Lucia considered the question, unused to thinking beyond the immediate concerns of rent and bills. I'd study linguistics, maybe work as a translator or interpreter. Use the languages I know to actually help people, not just take drink orders. You speak more than Sicilian, Italian, Spanish, some French. I taught myself from library books and online courses. She shrugged, embarrassed. It's not formal education, but I'm fluent enough. Alexander's expression turned thoughtful. That's a valuable skill set, more valuable than you probably realize. When he stood to leave an hour later, Lucia walked him to the door. He paused on the threshold, seeming to debate something internally. "You surprised me today," he finally said. "Most people would have taken the escape route. Run as far and fast as possible. I'm not most people." Lucia managed a tired smile. "Apparently, I'm stubborn and foolish." "Brave," Alexander corrected quietly. "The word you're looking for is brave." Their eyes held for a moment too long, something unspoken passing between them and the narrow entryway. Then Alexander cleared his throat and stepped back. "Get some rest. Tomorrow, we'll figure out what comes next." After he left, Lucia locked the door and leaned against it, her heart beating faster than the situation warranted. She pulled out the business card he'd given her, running her thumb over the embossed numbers. Alexander Bellini, crime boss, dangerous man, her only protection against people who wanted her dead. And somehow, against all logic, someone she was beginning to trust. 7 days in the Tribeca apartment felt like 7 years. Lucia had always considered herself adaptable, someone who could make the best of any situation. But confinement tested that belief in ways she hadn't anticipated. The space itself was comfortable enough. Clean sheets, a functional kitchen, windows that let infiltrated sunlight through bulletproof glass. But knowing she couldn't leave, couldn't even step outside for a walk without armed escorts, made the walls press closer each day. She filled the hours with whatever she could find reading on her phone until her eyes burned, cooking elaborate meals from the groceries that appeared like clockwork every other morning, watching the street below through those reinforced windows, counting taxis, studying pedestrians, searching for any sign of the danger Alexander insisted was still hunting her. The security detail rotated every 8 hours. Different faces, but the same watchful silence. Men and women who nodded politely when she offered coffee but never engaged in actual conversation. They were there to protect her, not befriend her. On the 7th morning, Lucia was staring at her 3rd cup of coffee when her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. She almost didn't answer, then recognized the area code from Alexander's business card. "Miss Grant." His voice carried clearly through the speaker. "How are you holding up?" Lucia glanced around the apartment at the book she'd already read twice, the television she'd watched until the programs blurred together. "I'm going quietly insane, if we're being honest, but I'm alive, so there's that." A low chuckle reached her ear. "Fair assessment. I have a proposition that might help with the sanity issue." "I'm listening." "My people confirmed continued cartel activity in the city. They're looking for you, which means you need to stay protected. But you don't need to stay idle." He paused. "I have several meetings scheduled this week with Italian suppliers, legitimate business contacts for the import company. I need a translator who understands not just the language, but the cultural context, someone who can read between the lines." Lucia's pulse quickened. "You want me to work for you?" "I want to put your skills to use while you're under my protection. The meetings will be in secure locations. You'll have security the entire time, and it gives you something productive to do besides count ceiling tiles." "What kind of meetings?" "Olive oil importers from Tuscany today. Wine distributors from Piedmont on Thursday. All legitimate operations. Nothing that will put you in danger beyond what already exists." His tone shifted slightly. "This isn't charity, Lucia. I genuinely need someone with your language abilities. Most translators I hire are competent, but they miss nuances." "You wouldn't." The use of her first name sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. She pushed it aside, focusing on the practical aspects. "Where would these meetings happen?" "My office, conference rooms in neutral buildings, a few restaurant locations I control. You'd never be exposed or vulnerable, and you'd be compensated properly, not as a favor, but as an employee." Lucia walked to the window, pressing her palm against the cool glass. Below, the city moved in its endless rhythm. Delivery trucks, business people with coffee, dog walkers navigating crowded sidewalks. Life continuing while she remained frozen in place. "When's the first meeting?" she asked. 2 hours. I'll send a car." The offices of Bellini Import Solutions occupied 3 floors of a building in Midtown, far more corporate and legitimate looking than Lucia had expected. Glass-walled conference rooms, assistants typing at sleek desks, the hum of normal business operations that could have belonged to any successful company. Alexander met her in the lobby himself, dressed in a charcoal suit that made his dark eyes appear even more intense. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for giving me something to do besides memorize wall textures." Lucia had dressed in the most professional clothes the security team had retrieved from her apartment. Black pants and a cream blouse that felt inadequate next to the expensive fabric surrounding her. "You look fine." Alexander's gaze swept over her once, quick and assessing. "The Tuscany delegation arrives in 20 minutes. 3 representatives from a family-owned olive grove that's been producing oil for 6 generations. They speak English, but prefer Italian for business discussions. They're also very traditional, very proud. Respect matters more than anything." Understood. He led her to a conference room where Joseph was already setting up laptops and presentation materials. The older man nodded at Lucia with something that might have been approval. "She knows what she's doing," Alexander told Joseph. Leather work. The Italians arrived precisely on time. 3 men in their 50s and 60s wearing suits that had clearly been tailored in Europe. They greeted Alexander with warm handshakes and careful formality, then turned curious eyes on Lucia when Alexander introduced her. "This is Lucia Grant, my translator for today's meeting." She speaks Italian and Sicilian fluently. The oldest of the 3, a man with silver hair and weathered hands, addressed her directly in rapid Italian. "Your family is from Italy, Signorina." The honorific meant miss, but it felt like a test. "My grandmother came from Sicily." Lucia replied in the same language, matching his regional accent without thinking. "Asmal village near Palermo." She made sure I learned properly. Not the broken Italian Americans usually speak. Something lit in the old man's eyes. "Ah, a true daughter of Sicily. Your grandmother taught you well. I am Antonio Ricci, and these are my brothers, Marco and Jeppe. We are very pleased to meet you." The tension in the room immediately softened. What could have been a formal, guarded negotiation transferred into something closer to a conversation between family. Antonio and his brothers relaxed in their chairs, their Italian flowing more freely as Lucia translated back and forth between them and Alexander. But she did more than simply convert words. When Antonio used a phrase that referenced an old Tuscan saying about quality versus quantity, Lucia didn't just translate literally. She explained the cultural context to Alexander. The deeply held belief among traditional producers that rushing meant sacrificing excellence. When Alexander proposed distribution terms, Lucia softened the language slightly, framing it in a way that emphasized partnership rather than transaction. The Ricci brothers responded with enthusiasm, rather than defensive posturing that had apparently stalled previous negotiations. 2 hours later, they had a preliminary agreement that Joseph described as the best terms anyone had managed to extract from the notoriously difficult Ria family in 5 years of trying. Antonio clasped Lucia's hands as they prepared to leave. "You have a gift, Signorina. Miss, not just for language, but for understanding people. Your grandmother would be very proud." After the Italians departed, Alexander turned to Lucia with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You were remarkable." "I just translated. No." He shook his head. "You read them, understood what mattered to them, and adjusted the conversation accordingly. That's not translation." That's negotiation at a level most people never achieve. Warmth flooded Lucia's cheeks. My grandmother always said language is about connection, not just words. She was right. Alexander checked his watch. It's nearly 7. Have you eaten? Not since breakfast. There's a place in the West Village I think you'd like. Nothing fancy, just good food and quiet atmosphere. He paused, considered a professional dinner. We can discuss how the other meetings this week should be structured. Lucia knew she should probably decline, maintain some kind of boundary between her situation and whatever this was becoming. But the thought of going back to that apartment, to the silence and the waiting, made the decision easy. I'd like that. The restaurant occupied a narrow brownstone on a tree-lined street, the kind of place tourists would walk past without noticing. No sign outside, just a discreet number above an unmarked door. Alexander led her through to a back room where half a dozen tables were scattered across worn wooden floors. Theona, an elderly Italian woman who called Alexander by his first name, seated them at a corner table and disappeared into the kitchen without taking their order. She bring whatever she made today, Alexander explained. Maria doesn't believe in menus. You eat what she cooks or you go somewhere else? My grandmother was the same way. Lucia smiled at the memory. She'd spend all day making Sunday dinner and get offended if you didn't eat 3 helpings of everything. Did you cook with her? Every weekend, she taught me to make sauce from scratch, to roll pasta by hand, all the old recipes her mother had taught her. Lucia traced the grain of the wooden table with one finger. After she died, I couldn't bring myself to make any of it. Too many memories, Alexander nodded slowly. I understand that. My mother's kitchen was her domain. After she passed, my sister tried to cook her recipes, but it never tasted right. Like something essential was missing beyond just the ingredients. Maria returned with wine, a deep red that tasted like earth and summer. Came plates of food, simple preparations that showcased quality ingredients. Grilled vegetables, fresh mozzarella, bread still warm from the oven. They ate and talked, the conversation flowing between personal history and present circumstances. Lucia told him about her dreams of studying languages, the scholarship applications she'd filled out before her grandmother's medical bills consumed what little savings they had. I worked at a coffee shop in college, she explained. Took night classes when I could afford them. Medit through 2 semesters before the money ran out completely. After Carmilla died, I had to drop out and work full-time just to cover rent. That's when you started at Vittorio. No, I worked at 3 other restaurants first. Vittorio was actually a step up. The pay was better and the clientele tipped well if you kept your head down and didn't cause problems. Until you decided to cause a very specific problem by saving my life. Lucia met his gaze across the table. I'd do it again, even knowing what it cost me. Why? Alexander leaned forward slightly. You lost your job, your apartment essentially, your normal life. Most people would regret that decision by now because letting you die would have cost me more. She struggled to articulate the feeling. I would have lost myself. The person my grandmother raised me to be. Some things matter more than convenience or safety. Something shifted in Alexander's expression. A softening around his eyes that made him look younger, less guarded. Your grandmother raised someone remarkable? Before Lucia could respond, Maria appeared with dessert, effectively ending the moment. But the warmth in Alexander's gaze lingered. Even as the conversation shifted to safer topics, they were walking to the car an hour later when Lucia noticed the headlights. A dark sedan had been parked across the street when they arrived. Now it pulled away from the curb the moment they stepped outside, moving slowly in their direction. Alexander's hand found her elbow immediately, his grip firm but not painful. Get in the car now. His driver already had the engine running, passenger door open. Lucia slid into the back seat as Alexander joined her, his body angling to shield hers from the street. Joseph appeared from somewhere, phone already at his ear. "We've got a tail," the driver said, his voice calm despite the tension crackling through the vehicle. "Black sedan, 2 occupants Weisel, following since we left Midtown." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Los them. Don't let them track where we're going." The next 15 minutes passed in a blur of turns and acceleration. The driver navigated the city streets with precision, using traffic and timing to put distance between their car and the pursuing sedan. Lucia gripped the door handle, her heart hammering as they wove through intersections and doubled back on their route twice. Finally, after a series of turns that left Lucia completely disoriented, the driver spoke again, clear. "They lost us near Union Square, but Alexander didn't relax. They know she's mobile now. They'll be watching, waiting for another opportunity." He turned to Lucia, Heist's expression grim. "The Tribeca apartment isn't safe enough anymore. They're actively hunting, which means we need better security." "Where then?" "I have a property in Greenwich, Connecticut. About 45 minutes from the city, gated, monitored, much harder to approach without being detected." He pulled out his phone, already typing. "We go there tonight. You pack whatever you need from the apartment, and we leave within the hour." Lucy wanted to argue to insist this was too much, that she didn't want to be more in his debt than she already was. But the memory of those headlights, the deliberate way that Sadden had followed them, silenced the protests. "Okay," she said quietly. Alexander's hand found hers in the darkness of the back seat, his fingers warm and steady. "I meant what I said. I won't let them hurt you." Lucia believed him. That should have frightened her more than the cartel did. This growing trust in a man whose world was built on violence and power. But sitting in that car, his hand wrapped around hers, she couldn't bring herself to care about the logic of it. She was safe for now. That was enough to hold on to. 3 weeks in Greenwich felt like stepping into a different world. The property sat at the end of a private road surrounded by mature trees that created a natural barrier from curious neighbors. The house itself was understated for someone of Alexander's means. A colonial-style home with cream-colored siding and black shutters. Gardens that had been professionally maintained but not ostentatiously designed. Lucia had expected something more fortress-like. All surveillance equipment and armed guards patrolling the perimeter. Instead, the security was subtle. Cameras hidden in landscaping. Sensors embedded in the driveway. A team that rotated through a converted carriage house at the edge of the property. Present but not intrusive. Her bedroom occupied the second floor, overlooking the back garden where late autumn had painted the remaining, leaves in shades of rust and gold. The furniture was simple but well made, the kind of pieces designed for comfort rather than display. Someone had stocked the closet with clothes in her size. Casual items that suggested whoever did the shopping understood she wasn't the designer label type. The first few days, Lucia barely saw Alexander. He commuted to the city for meetings, returning late in the evenings to disappear into his home office. She spent the time exploring the house, reading from the surprisingly extensive library, teaching herself to use the professional-grade espresso machine in the kitchen. On the 4th morning, she found Alexander already in the kitchen when she came downstairs. He stood at the counter in jeans and a navy sweater, the most casual she'd seen him, reading something in his tablet while coffee brewed. "Morning," he said without looking up. "I'm working from home today. Hope that doesn't bother you. It's your house." Lucia moved to pour herself coffee from the pot he'd already made. "I'm the intruder here. You're a guest under my protection." "Not the same thing." Heffinelli glanced up, his gaze lingering on her for a moment before returning to the tablet. "Joseph is sending over contracts from 2 potential suppliers in Rome. I'll need your assessment of the language." Make sure nothing's buried in the translations we received. You want me to work on them today? If you're willing. The office has a second desk and better internet than the rest of the house. So began a routine that evolved naturally over the following weeks. Mornings in the kitchen, Alexander making coffee while Lucia prepared breakfast. Conversations about everything from politics to childhood memories, flowing easily in the quiet hours before the day's demands took over. Days spent working in his home office, Lucia at the second desk he cleared for her, translating contracts and correspondence, while Alexander handled the legitimate and less legitimate aspects of his business. She discovered she had a talent for the work beyond just language skills. Reading contracts revealed patterns, connections between suppliers and distributors that told stories about relationships and power dynamics. She'd point out clauses that seemed innocuous but could be leveraged, terms that looked favorable but contained hidden costs. You should have studied business along with languages, Alexander commented one afternoon, reviewing her notes on a particularly complex wine distribution agreement. You have an instinct for it? My grandmother used to say I know to said what people didn't say more than what they did. Lucia stretched in her chair, her back tight from hours at the computer. Same skill, just applied differently. It's valuable. More valuable than you probably realize. He closed the laptop and stood. Walk with me. I need to clear my head, and you've been staring at screens all day. The garden paths wound through what had probably once been formal landscaping, but had softened with time into something more natural. They walked in comfortable silence. The November air crisp, but not yet bitter, leaves crunching underfoot. Tell me something, Alexander said eventually. What would you be doing right now if none of this had happened? If you were still working at Vittorio, living your normal life? Lucia considered the question. Probably getting ready for a dinner shift. Checking my bank account to see if I could afford new shoes, since mine have holes in the solace. Planning how to stretch my grocery budget for another week. That's existence, not living. It was my existence, my life. She bent topic up a particular vibrant red leaf, twirling it between her fingers. I didn't hate it. It wasn't what I dreamed of, but I was independent, taking care of myself. That mattered. And now I'm in a beautiful house doing work I actually enjoy. But I can't leave without armed guards, and I'm here because someone wants me dead. She released the leaf, watching it spiral away in the breeze. I don't know what this is. Alexander stopped walking, turning to face her. It's temporary. The situation with the cartel, my people are working on it. Once it's resolved, you can go back to your life if that's what you want. Is it? Lucia met his gaze. What I want, Did I get a say in any of this? You've always had a say. I'm not keeping you prisoner, aren't you? The words came out sharper than intended. I'm grateful for the protection, truly. But let's not pretend I have real freedom here. I go where you say, when you say, with whoever you assign to watch me. My entire life is in your hands. Alexander's jaw tightened because the alternative is you dead in an alley somewhere. Forgive me for prioritizing your survival over your independence. I'm not ungrateful. I just want to understand what happens when this is over. Do I go back to being a waitress? Do I disappear with that fake passport you made? What's the end game here? I don't know. The admission seemed to cost them something. I haven't thought that far ahead because right now keeping you alive is the only thing that matters. Before Lucia could respond, his phone buzzed. Alexander glanced at the screen, his expression immediately hardening. I need to take this. We'll continue this conversation later. He strode back toward the house, already speaking rapidly into the phone in Italian. Lucia followed more slowly, that familiar feeling of being adrift settling over her again. That evening, Alexander's sister arrived unannounced. Lucia was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard voices in the foyer. A woman's laugh followed by Alexander's lower tones. She wiped her hands on a towel and moved to the doorway. The woman embracing Alexander was petite, maybe 5'3", with the same dark hair and brown eyes, but softer features. She wore jeans and a Boston University sweatshirt, canvas bag slung over one shoulder, looking nothing like febblish professionals Lucia had seen in Alexander's office. "You said you'd visit last month," the woman was saying, poking Alexander in the chest. "Then last week, I figured if you wouldn't come to me, I'd come to you, Lauren." Alexander's tone carried warning and affection in equal measure. "You should have called first and give you time to tell me not to come." "No chance." Lauren's eyes found Lucia hovering in the kitchen doorway. "Oh, you have company." "I didn't realize." "I'm sorry. This is Lucia Grant." Alexander's voice was smooth as ever as his hand slid to the small of Lauren's back, guiding her forward with a subtle pressure that was both possessive and dismissive. "Lucia, this is my sister Lauren," he continued evenly, who apparently never learned the meaning of personal boundaries. An impressive accusation. Considering his entire empire was built on ignoring them, Lauren stepped forward without hesitation, extending her hand with an easy, open smile. "It's nice to meet you. Alex almost never has guests here, so you must be someone important." A faint warmth crept up Lucia's neck. "I'm working for your brother temporarily," she said carefully. "He was kind enough to let me stay while some business matters get resolved." Lauren's gaze flicked to Alexander, her eyebrow lifting. "Business matters? Sure, and I'm the Queen of England." "Lauren," Alexander warned, the single word sharp with authority. She lifted her hands in mock surrender. All right. I'll behave." Then she inhaled deeply. "Wow, something smells incredible. Are you cooking?" "Just pasta with vegetables," Lucia said, gesturing toward the kitchen. "Nothing fancy. I'd love to stay for dinner." The meal unfolded more comfortably than Lucia had expected. Lauren filled the air with stories about her middle school students, the daily chaos of teaching, the apartment she'd just moved into in Cambridge. She spoke with warmth and humor, turning small frustrations into entertaining anecdotes. Lucia found herself laughing, relaxing despite the awkwardness of the situation. Across the table, Alexander watched them quietly, his expression unreadable. There was something there, something between satisfaction and unease that Lucia couldn't quite name. After dinner, Lauren insisted on helping with the dishes, while Alexander retreated to his office to take a call. The moment he left the room, Lauren's demeanor shifted. Not cold, but sharper. More observant, so she said lightly, drying her hands. "What's really going on here?" Lucia kept her focus on the plate she was drying. "I told you. I work for him and I needed a safe place to stay." Lauren's voice remained gentle, but there was steel beneath it. "I haven't seen my brother in 6 months. He never works from home. He never lets people stay here. This house is his sanctuary from the rest of his life. So either you're in serious danger and he's protecting you, or something else is happening." Lucia exhaled slowly. "The danger part is true. I witnessed something I wasn't supposed to. Now the wrong people want to make sure I can't testify. And Alex is keeping you safe," Lauren said, nodding, yes. She accepted the answer without pressing further, clearly understanding that some questions were safer left unasked. "He's good at that. Keeping people safe. Sometimes too good." She paused. "He thinks if he controls every variable, nothing bad can happen to the people he cares about." Lucia hesitated. "I'm not sure I qualify as someone he cares about. I think I'm more of an obligation." Lauren turned fully toward her. "You're in his house, eating at his table, working in his office." Her gaze was knowing. My brother doesn't do obligations here. If you're here, it's because he wants you here. The words settled into Lucia's chest warm. Unsettling and impossible to ignore. Lauren stayed through the weekend, filling the house with a kind of energy it hadn't known in a long time. She and Lucia slipped easily into companionship cooking together, walking the garden paths, talking about books, travel, and the lives they once imagined for themselves before reality intervened. On Sunday evening, as Lauren prepared to drive back to Boston, she hugged Lucia tightly. "Thank you. For what?" Lucia asked. "For whatever you're doing that makes him look less lonely." Lauren pulled back, her expression serious. "Alex has been alone in ways that have nothing to do with company. He keeps everyone at a distance because he thinks that's how he protects us. But you're here and he's different, present. That's not nothing." After Lauren left, the house felt quieter. Too quiet. Lucia found Alexander in his office, staring at his computer screen without really seeing it. "Your sister is wonderful," she said from the doorway. "She's a menace," he replied, though affection softened the words. "Did she interrogate you?" "She was curious. I didn't tell her anything specific." "Good. The less she knows about my world, the safer she is." He turned his chair to face her fully. "She likes you." "Lauren doesn't like people easily. The feeling is mutual." They stood in silence for a moment, something unspoken lingering between them until Joseph appeared in the hallway. His expression grim. "Boss, we need to talk." Alexander's posture shifted instantly. "About what?" "The Sinaloa situation." The warmth drained from Alexander's expression. "My office, now." Lucia started to step away, but Alexander stopped her. "Stay. This concerns you too." Joseph closed the door behind them and placed a tablet on the desk. "We got intelligence from our contact in Newark. The cartel is changing tactics." Alexander's voice dropped dangerously low. "Explain." "They're not going after Lucia directly anymore. They're planning simultaneous hits on your operations, Jersey, Queens, the Bronx. Maximum damage. They want to force your hand." Lucia's stomach dropped. "Force your hand how?" Joseph glanced at her, then back at Alexander. "They're going to demand you hand her over in exchange for backing off. They want to make protecting her too expensive." "When?" Alexander asked. "Soon. Days, maybe a week." Alexander stood abruptly. "Double security at all locations. Move high-value inventory. Full surveillance on every approach." Joseph hesitated. "Even with all that, if they hit 3 sites at once, we're going to take losses. Significant ones." "Are you suggesting I give them what they want?" "I'm suggesting we consider every option." "No." The word cut through the room like a blade. "I don't negotiate with cartels. And I don't sacrifice people under my protection." Joseph exhaled slowly. "This could turn into a war. Then that's what it becomes." Lucia stood frozen as the reality settled in. The storm wasn't coming anymore. It had already begun. The FBI arrived without ceremony. No flashing lights. No dramatic entrances. Just 2 unmarked sedans at the gate and a quiet request to speak inside. Alexander watched them on the security feed, jaw set, expression unreadable. "They won't leave empty-handed," Joseph said beside him. "I know," Alexander replied. "Bring Lucia." She joined them in the office minutes later, heart steady despite the tension. She had expected this moment since the night she chose to testify. Still, the weight of it pressed down hard. The agents introduced themselves, calm, professional, eyes sharp with practiced restraint. "Agent Miller did most of the talking. We're aware Ms. Grant is under your protection," Miller said evenly. "We're also aware that a cartel is making moves to retrieve her." Alexander didn't bother denying it. "Then you know she's safer here?" Miller shook his head. "No one is safe once a war starts. What we want is to end it." Lucia leaned forward. I can help. Alexander's voice cut in immediately. No, Miller glanced between them. We're not talking about putting her on the street. We're talking about controlled exposure. A draw. Joseph stiffened. You want to use her as bait? We want to flush them into a single location, Miller corrected. A warehouse in Newark. We've been tracking it for months. Money, weapons, distribution. If they believe Lucia is being moved, they'll come. Lucia felt Alexander's hand tighten around the back of her chair. Absolutely not, he said. Alexander, she said quietly, turning to him. Listen. No, he repeated. This ends with you alive and untouched. I won't compromise on that. Miller exhaled. Then you'll be fighting blind. They'll keep hitting you until something breaks. Silence settled heavy in the room. Lucia stood. I testified because I believed the truth mattered more than my fear. That hasn't changed. Alexander rose with her. This is different. How? Because now it's personal? She met his gaze, unwavering. It always was. The plan took shape slowly, painfully. Layers of protection, decoys, federal oversight. Alexander insisted on his own people embedded in every phase. The FBI insisted on jurisdiction. Compromise came only because there was no alternative. Lucia trained for days. Not with weapons. Alexander refused that, but with situational awareness, timing, and escape protocols. She memorized routes, code phrases, signals. Learned how to walk into danger without showing it on her face. At night, she and Alexander barely spoke about the plan. When they were together, it was quiet shared meals, silent moments, stolen glances heavy with things unsaid. On the third night before the operation, Lucia found him on the terrace. City lights flickering below. You're angry, she said. I'm terrified, he corrected. She stepped closer. You don't have to do this. Yes, he said softly. I do. She reached for his hand. Whatever happens tomorrow, don't, he interrupted. We're not doing goodbyes. She nodded, though fear curled tightly in her chest. The day of the move came cold and gray. Lucia rode in the back of an armor's IV, flanked by agents she'd just met. Alexander followed in a separate vehicle, jaw locked. Eyes never leaving her reflection in the glass. They made it halfway to the decoy location before the first signal came through. They've taken the bait. Miller's voice crackled over comms. Multiple vehicles rerouting toward Newark. The warehouse loomed large and silent when they arrived. Too silent. Lucia stepped out, heart pounding but steady. She walked exactly where she was told. Stood exactly where the cameras could see her. Minutes. Stretched out, then engines roared in the distance. Alexander listened as reports poured in. Targets confirmed. Perimeters closing. Tactical teams moving into position. And then everything went wrong. Movement on the east side. Someone shouted. Unidentified vehicles more than expected. Miller swore. This is bigger than intel suggested. Alexander's voice cut through the chaos. Abort. Pull her out now. Lucia heard it too, but before anyone could move. Gunfire shattered the air. She dropped instinctively. Agents shielding her as shots echoed through the warehouse district. Sirens wailed. Commands overlapped. Alexander was already moving. He ignored orders, protocol, jurisdiction. By the time Joseph realized what he was doing, Alexander was out of the vehicle and advancing. Weapon drawn, eyes locked on the warehouse. Get her out. He barked. Lucia was dragged toward the SUV, but she fought it. Alexander, a hand clamped over her mouth as she was shoved inside, and the doors slammed shut. From the window, she saw him disappear into the smoke and chaos. And for the first time since this began, she was certain this was no longer about protection. It was about survival. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Gunfire ricocheted off steel beams. the sound sharp and deafening as shouts tore through the air. Floodlights snapped on in blinding bursts, turning shadows into sudden, violent clarity. Men scattered. Orders were barked in English and Spanish, overlapping into noise. Alexander moved through it like a force of nature. He didn't hesitate. He didn't slow. Every step was deliberate, every shot precise. Years of control, of discipline, of never allowing emotion to interfere now, sharpened into something lethal. North entrance secure. A voice crackled over coms. 2 down on the west side. Alexander ignored everything, except the path ahead of him inside the warehouse. The smell of oil and dust mixed with cordite. Crates were stacked high, some marked with false shipping labels, others already split open to reveal weapons, cash, and drugs. It was exactly what the FBI wanted, and exactly where Alexander should not have been. Joseph's voice cut through the channel. Boss, pull back. Tactical units are moving in. I see them, Alexander replied, eyes scanning the upper CATWALK stat movement. He fired just as a figure leaned out from behind a railing. The body crumpled, hitting the concrete with a sickening thud. Another burst of gunfire erupted to his left. Alexander dove behind a forklift, heart pounding not with fear, but with fury. Outside, Lucia fought against the agent holding her back. Let me go, she shouted. He's still in there. We're evacuating. The agent yelled back, dragging her toward the vehicle. An explosion rocked the far end of the warehouse. The ground trembled. Flames licked upward as alarms screamed. Lucia twisted violently, breaking free just long enough to look back. She saw Alexander through the smoke uninjured, moving alive. Relief flooded her chest, followed immediately by terror. Inside, FBI tactical teams surged in from multiple points. Shouts of federal agents echoed as suspects dropped weapons, some surrendering, others trying desperately to flee. One didn't. A man emerged from behind a stack of crates, weapon raised. Eyes locked on Alexander. Time slowed. Alexander turned just as the trigger was pulled. The shot rang out, and Alexander felt the impact, sharp and burning, ripping through his side. He staggered, barely managing to return fire. The man collapsed, but Alexander went down with him, hitting the floor hard. Man down. Someone yelled. Joseph reached him first, dragging him behind cover as medics rushed forward. You stupid bastard, Joseph muttered, hands pressing against the wound. You promised you'd stay out, Alexander grimaced. Had to make sure. Of what? That she got out. The warehouse fell eerily quiet as the last suspects were restrained. Sirens closed in from every direction. Lucia burst through the perimeter minutes later, ignoring every order thrown her way. She dropped to her knees beside Alexander as medics worked. You're bleeding, she said, voice shaking. I noticed, he replied faintly. Managing a crooked smile, she grabbed his hand, refusing to let go. You weren't supposed to be in there. And miss all the excitement? His breath hitched. Don't look like that. I'm not dying. You don't get to decide that, she snapped, tears blurring her vision. He squeezed her hand weakly. Seems we both have that problem. He was rushed to the hospital under heavy guard. The night blurred into sterile lights, clipped voices, and the endless ticking of a clock in a waiting room that smelled of disinfectant and fear. Hours later, a doctor finally emerged. He's stable, she said. The bullet missed anything vital. He's lucky. Lucia exhaled a breath she felt she'd been holding for days. Joseph appeared beside her, exhaustion etched into his face. The warehouse was a gold mine. Weapons, cash, names. Sinalo's East Coast operation is finished. And the people responsible? Lucia asked. In custody, he replied. Or dead. When Lucia was finally allowed into Alexander's room, He was pale but awake, eyes tracking her the moment she entered. "You look terrible," he said. She laughed shakily. "You got shot, minor inconvenience." She moved closer, lowering her voice. "You scared me." His expression softened, something unguarded flickering through. "I know." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what almost happened settling between them. "This changes things," Lucia said quietly. "Yes," he agreed. "There's no going back now." Outside the room, the war was officially over, but what came after would be just as dangerous. The fallout was immediate. By morning, the warehouse raid was everywhere, sealed indictments unsealed. Federal press statements carefully worded. Names that had circulated in whispers now spoken aloud on the news. The Sinella East Coast network collapsed almost overnight. Assets were frozen. Routes went dark. Men disappeared into custody or silence. Alexander watched it all from a hospital bed. Lucia sat beside him most days, the rhythmic beep of monitors becoming background noise. He healed quickly, physically at least. The wound closed. The pain dulled, but something else had shifted beneath the surface. "You should disappear for a while," Joseph said one afternoon, arms crossed near the window. "Let things cool." "They won't," Alexander replied. "Not completely." Joseph glanced at Lucia. "Which is why the feds are offering her a deal." Lucia stiffened. "A deal?" "Witness protection," Joseph said. "New identity. New life." Alexander's jaw tightened. "That's not happening." Lucia met his gaze. "Alexander, listen, no." She took his hand. "This was never supposed to be permanent. You knew that." "I knew it might end badly," he said quietly. "I didn't expect it to end like this. The FB I didn't push. They didn't have to." Lucia's testimony was already on record. Her cooperation had dismantled an entire operation. Protection was an offer, not a threat. "I'm not running," Lucia told them calmly. "I'll testify publicly if I have to." Alexander said nothing until they were alone. "You don't belong in my world," he said finally. "I know," she replied. "But I won't pretend it didn't change me." Weeks passed. Alexander returned to work slowly, deliberately. Some alliances fractured, others strengthened. Power shifted, but it did not leave him. If anything, the war had clarified things. Lines were redrawn, rules rewritten. Lucia returned to her career, stepping back into courtrooms with a steadiness she hadn't known before. Her name carried weight now. So did her silence. They saw each other less, not because they didn't want to, but because neither knew what shape after was supposed to take. The invitation arrived in late autumn, a black envelope. Heavy stock. One name embossed in silver. Vittorio Moretti. "Don't go," Joseph said immediately. "I have to," Alexander replied. "If I don't, it looks like weakness." Lucia read the invitation twice. "You don't need me there. I want you there." The event was held in a restored opera house overlooking the river. Old money, older grudges. Lucia felt every eye track them as they entered together, him composed and commanding, her calm but unmistakably out of place. Vittorio greeted them with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You've been busy, Alexander." "So I hear," Alexander replied coolly. The conversation was polite, civil. Dangerous beneath the surface. Later on the balcony, Lucia exhaled slowly. "This world never stops watching." "No," Alexander said. "It never forgets either." She turned to him. "Is there room in it for someone like me?" He didn't answer right away. "I don't know how to be half of this," she continued. "And I won't become something I'm not." He studied her face, searching. "And I don't know how to leave it." They understood each other perfectly in that moment. Their goodbye was quiet. No promises they couldn't keep. No dramatic declarations. just a shared acknowledgement of what had been and what couldn't be forced to last. Months later, Lucia stood in a cemetery just outside the city, a modest headstone, a name from a case long closed. She placed fresh flowers at its base, hands steady, heart calm. She felt him before she saw him. Alexander stood a few steps back, hands in his coat pockets. Older somehow, softer around the edges. "You always come here?" he said. "It reminds me why I chose this," she replied. They walked together without speaking, past rows of stone and memory, toward the car waiting at the gate. No guards nearby. No weapons visible. Just night air and quiet understanding. As they drove, city lights stretching ahead. Lucia leaned back in her seat. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew this. Then sitting beside Alexander as they drove through the night toward home, Lucia knew with absolute certainty that she'd make the same choice again every single time. The end.